All right, good morning or afternoon, class. Got a quick lesson to you today on the early stages of U.S. government under British rule. We're talking about the fact that Britain still owns the colonies, yet the United States is taking actions into their own hands and making their own forms of government. You can see we got Benjamin Franklin. He is part of the story today, and this wonderful Join or Die flag, which you may have seen in Mr. Fergie's room if you had him last year. Talk about how those relate to our story today. Please make sure that you fill in your notes as accurately as possible. If you need to pause, please do so to keep up, but I'm going to try to go pretty quick. In 1774, frustrated delegates from all of the 13 colonies who couldn't stand King George and his tyrant rule and all of his taxes met to create a declaration of rights and grievances. Rights and grievances. Grievances are complaints, remember. So they wanted to do this so that they made their complaints well known to the king in order to promote change. Prominent figures like John Adams and George Washington were a part of this group, is what you need to know there. That was known as the First Continental Congress. That was around, again, as I said, in 1774. So this was still before our Declaration of Independence. We were still loyal, in most cases, to Great Britain. The Second Continental Congress. All right, after the Redcoats started to move in on Boston after things like the Boston Massacre and the first shot heard around the world, delegates had to meet yet once again. As you can see in the picture, we have more people getting involved here. They're starting to think more about their own independence, yet they are remaining loyal to the crown. Most of them actually are. But these delegates decide, due to redcoats moving in like crazy into places like Boston to protect their assets, which are the colonies, they create a Continental Army. And they name George Washington, who now is pretty old, as leader of the Continental Army. Washington agrees and accepts this, and he ends up working for really no pay. Congress also urges states to start to adopt their own constitutions. They're starting to think about how can we rule ourselves different from Great Britain as a monarchy and try to promote our own equality. Okay? So this idea of creating constitutions as a state is really important. It's one of the first steps in getting our own form of government. With that, states are very, very cautious of replicating what didn't work before, which is this monarchy. On to the next page. So, as I've said, the states are acting very carefully. They want each state to have limited power over their government, unlike what King George has over the colonies. So to do so, they create a bicameral legislature. Bicameral means two houses, 1, 2. All right, so make sure you write that down and make sure you remember that. That's important. Bicameral. Bi is two, cameral meaning house. So one house would be called the governor. Guess what? We have a governor today. And the other house is the legislature or Congress, which is elected by the people. So the people still get to have or hold the power here, right? Power is in the hands of the people, and hopefully this will help prevent the abuse of power in the future. Okay? Here's the main point of this state constitution. States get involved in government, prepare for our independence in small part. The point is, states wanted a weak central government. They wanted to avoid this crazy thing called a monarchy, which they know didn't work in the past. Okay? So weak central government. That is going to be the theme as we go in and start to continue to talk about the Articles of Confederation. Weak central government. That would then later come up as being a problem and lead to the Constitution. All right, fast forward to 1776. The Second Continental Congress is really our second form of government, still under British rule, mind you, and they realize that they need a strong central government in order to contribute or coordinate a war effort against the British, who, by the way, is the most powerful army and navy in the world. Nobody in their right mind would go up against these people with superior manpower and training. But the Second Continental Congress, now having seen many of their states and their delegates and their supporters go to battle at Lexington and Concord and Bunker Hill against a superior army realizes, hey, this weak central government that we have with states is not working. We need something better. Let's talk about the something better. All right, the result in 1781 is the Articles of Confederation. So let's back up. For 5 years, almost 6 years, the Continental Congress was our government. The First Continental Congress, first government. Second Continental Congress, second government, loosely under the states. Okay? So for 5 years that was happening. We needed a stronger government to help defeat the British. So we'd start to think about doing that once we earned our freedom later in 1781. So the states, they had to organize themselves into what we will call a firm league of friendship. A firm league of friendship. Okay? So that means they had loyalties to one another just in times of war. So it's really convenient for protection, but not good when it comes to making decision making for the good of the whole country. So Congress would serve as the central government, right? Your elected delegates from each of the colonies. Here's what it could do. This is really important. What could this Congress do? The question is, or the answer I should say, is not much. All right? They could conduct foreign affairs, meaning they could talk to other countries, they could make peace arrangements, they could trade, they could form trade bargains. Okay? That's really it. They could maintain an army, like the Continental Congress under George Washington, to protect our country. Everybody was for that. And they could borrow and issue money. Okay? That's it. But they couldn't do a lot more. They couldn't control trade between states. Okay? New York, Massachusetts, the Congress couldn't control that. States were in charge of that, and that led to a problem. States could charge whatever they wanted for taxes. All right? Imagine this. You're a New Yorker. You go to Massachusetts to sell your tea or your whiskey or your molasses. Doesn't matter. They charge in Massachusetts 10%. If they didn't charge the same in other states, you would probably be inclined to go and trade more in those states with lower taxes. Speaking of taxes, they couldn't impose taxes on the states. States willingly had to give money. So, hey, you want some money? Can I have some money? No, you're not getting any from us. You go deal with your own problems. So that really wasn't effective in helping the government run and operate. They couldn't force citizens to join the military. So in times of war, like we were having at this point in time, the late 1770s, when we're fighting the British, a superior army, we couldn't force our citizens to fight for us in a draft. Later on, this would become part of the Constitution and part of our duties. We couldn't force states to contribute money. I've kind of already talked about this. So if the war was primarily in the North, which it was, Massachusetts, right? The Boston Tea Party, British move in and try to conquer and squash that. The southern states, like Georgia, North and South Carolina, who mainly were loyal to the crown, didn't contribute hardly squat. So it really wasn't fair. All right? What did this all do? Because of this weak establishment of government under the Congress, it maintained a lot of freedom and independence of states. States really truly did like that. So New York and Pennsylvania and Connecticut and Massachusetts, they could focus on what they were good at: fishing, lumber and shipbuilding, and business. Whereas in the South, like Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, they focused mainly on their crop building, right? And their plantations and things like that, cotton making. So states had a lot of freedom, which was extremely great. They didn't have it under King George, but it would lead to problems. We needed stronger government yet. So in talking about greater struggles, we'll end with this real quick and brief. Congress struggled to pass laws. And this is not good. If you see a problem, you want to fix it. So Congress had lots of problems under this, and they needed to have 19 of the 13 states in order for a vote to pass. That's extremely difficult. We'll learn later on that it's just a slight majority in one house and then in another. Amendments, changes. You had to have every single state approve it. Imagine that. Every single state. Today, it's not that way. It just needs to be a majority. All right, that's all I got for you. Hopefully you caught that about early government under British rule and their early form, the art of